In the small ripple-roofed town of Willowvale, a quiet library sat between the bustling bakery and the old stone clock tower. It was a place overlooked by most, except for curious children and a particularly imaginative boy named Milo Finch. Milo had ruffled brown hair, oversized glasses, and a collection of ink stains on his fingers. He came to the library every afternoon, drawn by the warmth of its wooden shelves and the gentle tick of its ancient grandfather clock. Tindle, the librarian, wore tweed jackets with elbow patches and smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. She always wore a kind smile that made you feel welcome. Other children would peek in sometimes, but Milo was the library's most devoted visitor. To him, each book was a doorway. The shelves were forests of wonder. But even Milo noticed that the library never changed. New books rarely appeared. No murals, no plants, not even a poster shifted on the pale walls. It was as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. That afternoon, as sunlight filtered through high windows, Milo wondered aloud, "Why do I come here every day if nothing ever grows or changes?" Mrs. Tindle looked up from her desk. "Sometimes," she said thoughtfully, "the greatest stories begin when you let your imagination grow." Milo puzzled over her words, not knowing they were the seed of an adventure. One rainy afternoon, the patter of drops against the windows made the library even cozier. Milo was hunting for a book on mythological birds when he noticed a strange glimmer behind a row of thick encyclopedias. Crawling closer, he discovered a book he had never seen before. Its cover was blank and velvety, with a pattern faintly like veins of a leaf. Opening it released the subtle scent of fresh earth and moss. But to his surprise, the pages inside were empty, white. Waiting, confused, Milo showed the book to Mrs. Tindle. "Where could this come from?" he asked. Mrs. Tindle inspected it with a knowing smile. "Some books," she said, "are waiting for the right story to be written. Why not give it a try, Milo?" Filled with curiosity, Milo took it to his favorite corner, ignoring the thunder outside. He pulled out his pens and began, not knowing that the moment he wrote his first word, imagination had begun to sprout in the heart of the library. As Milo wrote in the mysterious blank book, something wonderful happened. His words danced across the page, curling and twisting like vines. He wrote about a tiny library mouse who dreamed of flying. With every sentence, the smell of fresh leaves filled the air. Milo barely noticed it first, but Mrs. Tindle did. Green shoots began to sprout from the cracks in the floorboards. At first, they were as thin as threads. But as Milo's story grew wilder, of flying books and mouse-sized parachutes, so did the greenery. Leaves unfurled along the spines of the encyclopedias, and tendrils crept up the table legs. Bookshelves, which had always felt so still, now hummed with life and color. Mrs. Tindle winked knowingly at Milo but said nothing, letting his curiosity and imagination shape the moment. Milo, caught between awe and delight, realized that his stories were not just fun, they were alive, and his imagination was making the impossible possible. The next morning, Milo rushed to the library, heart pounding with anticipation. Overnight, the transformation had gone wild. Where there was once silence, now the very walls seemed to whisper with possibilities. Ferns spilled out of the card catalog, delicate moss carpeted the steps, and hanging vines wound between reading lamps. The tallest shelf now held a nest of pale pink flowers with tiny book-shaped petals. Even Mrs. Tindle wore a sprig of ivy tucked into her hair. Children pressed their faces to the windows, drawn by the jungle within. Milo was amazed, yet a little nervous. What if no one liked what his imagination had done? Mrs. Tindle greeted him warmly. "Your story has let everyone see the library in a new way, Milo," she said. Milo understood that curiosity, letting himself ask, "What if?" had created a place no one could have dreamed of alone. A leafy library soon became Willowvale's most exciting story. Children who had never read a book before crept inside, eyes wide with wonder. Milo was shy at first, but saw how his story brought smiles and laughter. When a little girl asked if she could sit by him, Milo nodded enthusiastically and began to read his mouse's adventures aloud. More children gathered, forming a circle under the green canopy that now arched above the reading rug. They asked questions. suggested ideas, and giggled when Milo acted out the mouse parachuting from a stack of dictionaries. Mrs. Tindle always encouraged them. Every question or idea caused the library to flourish more. By letting his curiosity flow into the world, Milo discovered that wonder grew best when shared. Word spread quickly, and soon parents, teachers, and townsfolk visited. Each newcomer brought their own curiosity. The baker wondered how bread might rise with the help of magical yeast. A teacher imagined flying chalkboards, and their musings seemed to stir the library's vines even more. Inspired, Milo invited everyone to write in the leafy book. As each person wrote, sometimes just a sentence or silly idea, a new plant would bloom, a fruit would appear, or the light would shift in color, painting rainbows on the walls. The library became a living tapestry of stories and questions. Curiosity was everywhere. In the smell of fresh parchment, the shapes of the furniture, the whispers of wind in the leaves. It was clear that when people shared their curiosity, growing together was even more wonderful. One evening, a storm swept through Willowvale, rattling windows and knocking out the town's power. The library was the only building that remained aglow, its leafy branches shimmering with soft, bioluminescent light. Frightened families gathered among the glowing vines and story blossoms. Milo found himself at the heart of it all. Mrs. Tindle handed him the leafy book, inviting him to keep the light alive. Milo, guided by curiosity, spun a story of a night owl who brought starlight to darkened towns. As he read, the leaves above their heads glimmered silver and gold, filling the library with comfort and hope. The storm outside faded into the background, and everyone realized that curiosity could light the darkest night. The next morning, the storm was gone, but the memory of light remained. Milo sat quietly, watching the sunbeam flicker through jade leaves. Mrs. Tindle sat beside him and posed a question. What would happen if the library itself could pick a story for everyone? Milo was puzzled and excited by the thought. Intrigued, he proposed a challenge to the children and visitors who gathered each afternoon. Let us each ask a curious question, and together we will write a woven tale. Every day, they added to a single story based on each other's wonderings. The vines responded, twining together in patterns as intricate as their thoughts. The library, once unchanged and silent, now pulsed with the heartbeat of curiosity. Over time, the leafy library transformed. Its walls were a living mural, adorned with impressions of every tale told. Branches shaped like dragons curled above plush reading chairs. Flower petals spelling questions shimmered along the railings. The townsfolk marveled at how their own questions blossomed into stories that hung overhead like lanterns. Milo realized that curiosity wasn't just about asking why. It was about daring to imagine what if, and having others join the journey. Mrs. Tindle beamed at Milo and the library full of story seekers. The seeds of curiosity he planted had grown wild and beautiful. Milo found joy not only in his stories, but in the questions others brought to bloom. In Willowvale, the library became more than a building. It was a garden of endless curiosity, tended by every visitor who asked a question or shared a dream. Milo, once the lone reader, was now the gardener of a flourishing world. The leafy book rested on a pedestal for all to see, its pages open for anyone to add their spark of wonder. Mrs. Tindle, proud and content, watched as the simplest question continued to grow the tallest stories. The library that grew leaves thrived, alive with curiosity, forever blossoming with every new question. And Milo knew, as he led a new friend through an archway of emerald leaves, that curiosity was the root from which the greatest stories and friendships would always grow.